Heading into week 11 of the fantasy football season, here's a few tight ends I look to get on the waiver wire this week. The first guy, Evan Engram of the New York Giants. So Evan Engram, I recommended him last week as a waiver wire guy to get. But right now, he was on bye week, obviously, and the Giants didn't play. But the last few games before that for Engram, week 7 versus the Panthers, 6 catches, 44 yards. Week 8 at the Chiefs, 3 catches, 15 yards, and a touchdown. And week 9 versus the Raiders, 3 catches, 38 yards, and a touchdown. So right here, Engram, he's been getting double-digit fantasy points, like I mentioned, the last 3 ball games. And that's a good sign here, because the last few seasons, he hasn't really been finding the end zone. He hasn't really been a fantasy factor. But right now, with another good matchup in week 11 at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that give up the 9th most fantasy points to tight ends, I think he could have a decent game. And he's available right now as well in 68% of fantasy leagues, and definitely worth an ad this week. The next guy is Tywin Conklin of the Minnesota Vikings. So Conklin, he's available in 70% of fantasy leagues. And I know this Minnesota Viking offense has tons of weapons, but Conklin, he got dropped in 8% of fantasy leagues coming into the week here, which was a little surprising to me. Week 8 at Dallas, 10.70 fantasy points, 5 catches, 57 yards. Week 9 at the Ravens, 5 catches, 45 yards. And week 10 at the Chargers, I know it was 3 catches, 2 of them were touchdowns, and only 11 yards. But hey, he's a red zone target for Kirk Cousins. Many teams are rolling defense all the way to Thielen and Justin Jefferson, with Conklin either open at times or obviously one-on-one matchups where he's the big guy in the middle of the field. So right here, he's got to be owned in way more fantasy leagues, in my opinion. Here's Conklin. He's having a good season, and he's a touchdown threat for sure here in Minnesota with 3 on the year, and he's available in 70% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end is Kmet of the Chicago Bears, so another guy who's on bye week but emerging as well over the last few weeks. So this Bear offense, they're starting to kick it into gear a little bit here over there in Chicago after Justin Fields, the first 5-6 starts of his career, been a total train wreck. But the last few games for Kmet, week 7 at Tampa Bay, 5 catches, 43 yards. Week 8 versus the Niners, 3 catches, 24 yards. And week 9 at the Steelers, 6 catches, 87 yards. So the targets are definitely there for Kmet. In the last 3 ball games for him, 20 targets. So they're targeting him. He's another big tight end who's athletic and can make plays, and is definitely a red zone threat. And the Bears here, they're just trying to find ways to move the football. I mentioned Mooney in the wide receiver video, and now I mentioned Kmet here at the tight end video, and he's available in 82% of fantasy leagues. So he's definitely a tight end that can make some noise and help fantasy teams. The next tight end is Trautman of the New Orleans Saints. So Trautman, the last couple games, he's been pretty decent in PPR leagues. Week 9 versus Atlanta, 4 catches, 47 yards. And week 10 at Tennessee, 5 catches, 32 yards. So right here in PPR, that's 8 points or more, obviously, the last 2 weeks. And right here, Trevor Siemian, in my opinion, he's spreading the football out better than Jameis Winston did over there in New Orleans. He's getting it to his receivers. He's getting his tight ends involved. We even saw Mark Ingram have a few long receptions in that week 10 ball game. And in week 11, Trautman's got a good matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles that give up the most fantasy points to tight ends. So right now, he's available in 95% of fantasy leagues, and he's a tight end trending up and definitely worth the waiver wire grab this week. In the 5th and final tight end I look to get on the wire this week, Dan Arnold of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mentioned Dan Arnold each and every week, probably the last 3 or 4 weeks here as a waiver wire ad. And this guy, he just does nothing but produces with 3 double-digit fantasy games in a row now since week 8. Week 8 at Seattle, 8 catches, 68 yards. Week 9 versus the Bills, 4 catches, 60 yards. And week 10 at the Colts, 5 catches, 67 yards, and a 2-point conversion. So right here, him and Trevor Lawrence have a good rapport. And like I've mentioned a lot as well in the videos, they wanted a tight end for the youngster Lawrence here, that he could have a security blanket and a good target in the middle of the field. And that's exactly what Dan Arnold's been. And he's still widely available in 74% of fantasy leagues. So right now, he should be owned way more, and Conklin as well, like I mentioned early in the video. So that's a few tight ends I'd look to get on the waiver wire for week 11 of the fantasy football season.